This week it's all about Nintendo and the top 5 most brutal shooters on the Super NES.
Wait, the SNES had more than 5 shooters? Could have fooled me.
How clever you are! While it's true the SNES was not known as a shooter powerhouse, in my mind it was always a matter of quality over quantity. You could put games like Axelay, Space Megaforce, Macross Scrambled Valkyrie up against some of the best that other consoles had to offer, and if you never played some of these classics, you truly missed out. And for my first pick, you're in for a serious treat. I'm not kidding. You may have seen this game before, but not like this. Originally, the game wasn't even going to make my top 5 list, as although it's a really cool game, it also had a lot of slowdown, making it too easy to make a top 5 brutal list. But all that changed when a special ROM hack was released that removed all slowdown from the game. Now normally, I don't include games like that on these lists. I stick with stock default difficulty. But when I finally played this version, I was so blown away, so shocked at how amazing the game became that it immediately shot up into my top 3 SNES shooters of all time. So ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the warp speed, zero slowdown, balls to the wall version of Gradius 3. From the opening stage, you can tell that you're in for a treat. While it's not difficult to start out, things fly much faster than you're used to. Gradius 3 really opens up the weapon possibilities with all types of great loadouts that you can choose from. And while I'd love to sit here and ramble for 10 minutes about my favorite loadouts, the reality is I'm a creature of habit with Gradius. I just go with the original loadout and call it a day. What can I say? I'm old school, baby. But back to the game. You can just tell that as things ramp up, it's gonna get really hairy. How long does that take to happen? Look no further than the bubbles of Stage 2. It becomes real clear, real quick that Konami intended this game to run with slowdown. Even the crazy hard arcade version runs with slowdown, so I had a feeling I was in for a treat. And the bubbles didn't disappoint. I was on the edge of my seat, maneuvering through this bit of madness, and it felt a lot more like Gradius 2 on the PC Engine, which also runs quite fast. The speed didn't make the boss any harder though, but buckle up Buttercup, because this party's just getting started. The bullets continue to fly hard and fast on Stage 3, and it again feels very much like Gradius 2. Well, technically it kind of is, being the same stage theme with similar obstacles. The gameplay is so fun and frantic here that I'm just gonna shut up for a moment and let you enjoy the awesome music and smooth gameplay. Can you imagine if it played like this back on the original SNES? It would have blown my mind. Powered up, this mini-boss is no sweat, but the actual boss is pretty dangerous with the speed of those lasers, with no more slowdown present. But Stage 4, the Moai heads, is the one I just couldn't wait for, and it turned out to be every bit the orgasm of bullets that I was expecting. The speed at which the Moai spit their rings is batshit insane, and it's not long before the screen is full of them. Once again, I can see why Konami added some purposeful slowdown to the game, because this is nuts. Literally, I think my sack retreated into its happy place, and my sphincter made a duck face, multiple times while playing this. This right here is hitting the shooter crack pipe, a straight up shmupgasm. Is it wrong I got a little excited? Hey, I just made up a new word, shmupgasm. What do you think? Should I trademark it? So after that shmupgasm of stage 4, this next level was cool but didn't quite live up to the hype. Pretty straightforward with enough options, but still cool. The forest stage is back to business as usual, throwing tons of bullets while keeping you in cramped spaces. Being a Gradius game, wiping out this far is pretty much a ticket to starting all over again, as especially with this speed, no way can you survive without any power-ups. And the plant boss here is actually a real bastard, as it pulls you into itself and makes it hard to dodge, while the bullets still fly at full speed, unaffected by the suction. Funny how that works. Oh yeah baby, it's speed stage time, and with this hack, it's now actually a speed stage, just like in Gradius 2. It's honestly about the same level of difficulty, and not too long, but it's fun while it lasts. I always loved this stage in part 2, and now enjoyed it here just as much. And it's time for the inevitable boss rush. As a whole, the bosses have been the easiest part of this hack so far and very manageable, but some of these guys are quite dangerous due to the laser speed and the density, especially this third boss here. Unless you're fully powered up in speed, which I try to avoid since it makes some sections way too easy to die on, you aren't fast enough to clear the volley of lasers. The trick is to clear most of them and end up in this gap between the last two. Boss 4 you can take down easily enough, as it's pretty much identical to part 2, and just as much fun to dodge. The next dude though is extremely dangerous for the same reasons as the last one, only the lasers cover even more area. No escaping these, just make sure to stay in front of the extensions and not the center. Time for the next to final stage, and I knew this was going to be a bitch, as it is in part 2. I eventually have to switch to the double shot to take out the turrets faster. This level was always about taking out the turrets and enemies before they get a chance to fire, as they'll overwhelm the screen real quick. So this final stage is all about being aggressive and taking things out quickly. Sit back and wait and you'll be toast. No slowdown to save you here. Make your way through some lasers here and you've made it to the walkers. Only this time, they're more of a pushover, as you can actually kill them and not have to avoid them for long. And now we have the salamander-inspired finale here, and this stage is extremely dangerous. After doing your best to not get tagged by these claws or the incoming bullets, you have these ultra-fast droplets to contend with. They're a real pain, as they bum rush you from behind in groups, with no slowdown, for which my loadout at least has no defense. Just gotta try to keep them in front of me until the last minute, and then dodge what's left, trying to rear end me. And through the final organic wall is the mostly defenseless brain. What does he say on this version?
Hey asshole, feed my soul.
Sorry dude, all I've got is this laser that you can go ahead and chow down on that, okay? And it's all over. I love how there's little bits of brain matter floating through space from the explosion. Still pulsating, by the way. Maybe I can snag a piece and bring it home to the wife as a gift. Although, I guess traveling at light speed for this mission, she's probably long gone. I'll just leave a jar on the gravestone. She always did say I had half a brain. Now she can have one too.
So what did you think? Pretty freaking amazing, right? And it's free to download, so if you can play it on an EverDrive or emulate it on your PC, I highly recommend you check it out. So how do you follow up that beast of a ROM hack? Well, since we just watched a bunch of Gradius, why not feature the greatest parody of the series? Parodius Da, taking everything that's cool and making it so colorful and cute that you'll be crapping rainbows and unicorns afterward. It's a feast for the eyes, the ears, and it'll make you smile. Or at least until it starts kicking your ass, as this game is definitely not as easy as its appearance would have you believe. Hiding underneath the facade of colorful graphics and humor is a game that can be just as difficult, if not more so, than some of the games that it parodies.
For the first few levels, this game will have you mesmerized. Aside from the fun gameplay, it's just packed with cuteness and humor. Aside from the classic Vic Viper I'm using here, you can also play as Octopus, Twinbee, and the cutest of all, Monsieur Penguin. This port is incredibly well done, and was the closest to the arcade original until the Saturn packs were released later. And the classic music tracks sound like a Junkie remixed them while on a sugar high after tearing through their Halloween stash of Snickers bars. For starters, this game has a rank system like other Gradius games that increases the difficulty the longer you survive without dying, as well as how powered up your options are. And what I always found interesting about the earlier Gradius games is not only how fun they are to play, but also how broken they can be as well. You either have the game mastered to where you can essentially complete it without dying, or you can keep starting over until you can one life clear it. I mentioned this before in my top 5 hardest shooters on the PC Engine when talking about Gradius 2, and that if you die just about anywhere past the first 3 stages, like the volcano stage, you may as well start the game all over, because once you lose a life and revert to a basic ship, it's nearly impossible, if not completely impossible in some spots, to recover. Konami just makes it insurmountable. And what makes Parodius Da an extra level of difficult is how long you have to survive to complete it. This game is long, at 10 levels. Can you imagine? That means you have to essentially survive all of these gauntlets without screwing up, and on some of the later stages, that's a task easier said than done. This happened in my playthrough and cements why this is one of the hardest shooters on the system. Here on the graveyard stage, there's a notorious area before the boss called the Umbrella section, and it's quite far into the game. Stage 7, I believe. This is where Konami just gives players the big middle finger and tells them to piss off, as even with a fully powered up ship, not knowing exactly how to position yourself will have you quickly overwhelmed and dead. No problem, right? Wrong, bitch. Konami starts you out right before the boss with only a couple of power-ups, enough to gain you some speed or a missile. And if you think there's any way, any trick, any amount of skill that will allow you to worm your way through this impossible mess of umbrellas with a pea shooter, you've taken one too many hits of the crack pipe for the day. Of course, you know that would be me, right? Since my playthrough was screwed anyway, I saved a state to see if I could find one, and then spent the good part of an hour trying every angle, every corner, every pattern to find a way. Nope, Konami said, go suck a nut. Even if you got to this point without death and have several lives saved up like I did, you've wasted your time. It's over. Take your several saved lives and shove them up your ass. You get to start over. So that's what I did. But it wasn't all for naught, as in my hour of misery, I did find one, just one trick, that had I had a couple options with me, will allow you to completely cheat this section and come out unscathed. Something I'll remember for next time.
Wanna hear it? Here it goes.
I wasn't going to be screwed by Konami's sadistic pleasure yet again, so when I finally got back here after replaying the game for a second time, I went right for it. First, kill this skeleton and dive right for the bottom right corner. Continue to push down at an angle and hug that corner, you won't die. When you do, make sure to place your options right behind you like this. They'll destroy that wretched skeleton that pops up and kills you when you aren't powered up. So now you know, if this section has thwarted your playthrough time and again, and you don't want to risk screwing up next time, follow this little trick and wait for them to all pass by. You're welcome, and when you do, don't forget to tell Konami to shove those umbrellas up their frosting-covered asses. The game doesn't get any easier from there, but thankfully there aren't many more gotcha sections either that are near impossible to get through. That is, aside from the overwhelming fire unleashed upon you in certain stages, like this ice level, where you want to have switched over to a double shot if you want to make it through alive. Oh, that's right, this game has 11 stages, I'm sorry, I forgot. Konami added a bathhouse level to the Super Famicom version, which I honestly found really entertaining. And the one good thing about Gradius is that once you do make it through the final stage, you know you don't have a final tough boss to contend with, but a poor, defenseless brain, squid, to mow down and get the hell out of Dodge. It's their one and only concession for a brutal, no-death gauntlet. Hiding inside this cute exterior lies a beast of a game, and one that rightfully deserves a place as one of the most brutal shooters on the Super Famicom.
And now we get to what's considered by many the hardest game of the entire SNES library, ROM hacks notwithstanding. No surprises here, that game is RType 3. Third Lightning. A unique creation exclusively for the Super Nintendo, it was a big improvement over the previous Super RType, which was plagued by slowdown. RType 3 was also a big kick in the nuts to a legion of younger Nintendo fans that were not prepared for the brutality that was about to be unleashed upon them.
RType 3 lives up to its reputation and that of the series, being one of the toughest that you'll play. Is it as tough as the original like I played on the TurboGrafx? That's a tough call. On the one hand, it starts more forgiving, with an opening stage that's quite easy and few will die on for very long. It's more about teaching you the basics and getting you hyped, with some cool music and effects for what's to come. And RType 3 definitely has a few new tricks to play around with. First and foremost are two new types of force pods with different weapon loadouts and features, and while one is mostly a variation of the original, a cool new addition that I immediately jumped on was the Shadow Force. It requires a bit more finesse to use, but in the right hands can be pretty powerful. The blue spread shot has an extreme angle, making it easier to reach some otherwise well-entrenched enemies. But my favorite aspect is using it as a weapon itself, as it does extra damage when shot out into enemies, and can be placed strategically for maximum impact. Another cool feature is the addition of a hyper attack, which can be toggled with your beam. In the case of the Shadow Force, not only does it allow you to unleash a barrage of powerful blasts for a limited time, but it also creates a shield around you while in effect, depending on how many satellites you have. Plus, I just like that cool wobble effect it has when I'm floating around with it. And you're going to need every bit of your new arsenal, as starting on Stage 3, this game starts to pull no punches. Stage 3 is a really cool series of descents and ascents through diagonal tunnels, requiring some deft use of your pod to keep the proper side of your ship protected. But it's nothing too difficult. on the level of the original. Not yet. That all changes on stage 4, which is also where my personal descent into hell began. It starts out reasonable enough, but once you reach the flaming laser beams, you'll start to get flashbacks of the moving block level from the original game. If you ever got that far. Yep, it's memory time, because there's no way in hell you'll avoid these incoming beams in time unless you're already in the right position. It's a cool section though, and well executed, and while memorization heavy, it's fun to figure out. But once you finish this mid-boss, get ready for all hell to break loose, because the game is about to turn you around and whip out that big rubber dildo that it was hiding in its briefcase. Literally, the game starts moving backwards so you can work your way through the same laser puzzle in reverse. The kicker is now you'll need to be pressed up against the back of the screen to avoid the lava, all while incoming enemies start trying to ram into you from behind. And getting rammed from behind is an apt metaphor for this section. If you love enemies that kill you from off screen that you couldn't see coming, this jig is your jam, baby. So back to this hellhole of stage 4, with enemies incoming from behind, even without a speed boost, you have to place yourself perfectly to not get nailed. With a speed boost, forget it. So now I'm stuck trying to navigate this hellhole with no force pod and no way to defend my rear end from the incoming dildo of enemies. And in typical sadistic fashion, it tempts you with all these power-ups you can't get to. Since you can't kill them, you have to place yourself in just the right spot so your power-ups can't kill you. Then watch them float away. After multiple attempts, I finally found a way to squeeze through to be met with the stage boss and not much of a weapon to speak of. Oh, but I'm a salty bastard right now, and I want sweet, sweet revenge for the violation I've just been put through. I know this gig. This fool needs to die before he becomes too erratic for me to dodge. Power up that hyper beam and let loose. Die? Hell yeah! Excuse me now, while I just lie down here for a minute. After that god-awful experience, you might be prepared for the worst, but you'll be surprised to know that stage 5 is quite fair. It was a bit tough at first, mind you, as I didn't have much of a weapon, but after worming through a couple tight spots and powering up, it was pretty smooth sailing. And this shape-shifting boss is honestly quite easy, in all respects, if not quite cool for its hit of nostalgic favorites. All hail the mighty Dopkeratops, coolest and easiest of boss monsters. I'm gonna pay for that one. The final stage is another bit of a puzzler, and in my opinion, the second toughest after stage 4. You have these walls that phase in and out, and getting caught in the wrong spot will mean instant death. You don't have a lot of enemies to contend with here, but the ones here take a bunch of hits, and are mostly there to annoy, and herd you into making a mistake. Another annoying feature of this level are these moving screen sections that actually pull you up or downward into the walls and ceilings. It's very, very easy to screw up and die here, and it's another sadistic creation by the team at IREM. It's basically a stage with very little room to maneuver between the phasing walls, enemies herding you around, and finding pockets of the screen where you're not being pulled up or down into a wall. The final boss is definitely much easier than the stage, not really shooting anything with speed or difficult to avoid. It's mostly just a battle of patience, slowly wearing it down without making a mistake. It does have one last little FU in store though, when its arms break out and suddenly swarm you in a final effort to ruin your run and make you start over. But once you've made it past this point, you're pretty much home free. Shove that force pod of yours down its throat, get the hell out of Dodge. And for your troubles, you get a short ending and an invitation to play this on advanced mode. I've got 4 more games to play, and I ain't got time for getting violated again on stage 4. But just thinking about playing through that second half of Stage 4 again, armed with nothing but a pea shooter, let alone in hard mode, gives me an unfresh feeling I'm not sure I'm jonesing for in the near future.
I kind of have a love-hate relationship with this next pick, and I wasn't looking forward to having to beat it again for this video. Not that it isn't a really tough game making this top 5 list, no doubt. It's got really cool graphics and effects, extremely memorable music, and a really cool weapon system that I really enjoy. But something about it always felt a bit off, like playing through it was a struggle. And I may be in the minority on this, as it's very well liked by a legion of SNES fans. But love it or hate it, playing it feels like going to war in a protracted battle of attrition. And that game is UN Squadron. But one thing that we could probably all agree on is that iconic intro and music had us hyped the moment we fired it up, and is still burned in my mind to this day.
For me, UN Squadron was always a game that was less than the sum of its parts. I loved the graphics, the music, the fantastic weapon loadouts and plane choices, adding tons of variety to the gameplay, and it was always a solid challenge. And the concept of collecting money to upgrade your plane and purchase more weapons added a cool RPG element to the mix. But with RPG elements comes grinding, and grinding and shooters don't mix. Unless you mean grinding your controller into the floor after dying or having to repeat simple bombing runs to earn points over and over again. In my opinion, UN Squadron starts out tougher than it becomes later in the game. Like an RPG, you start off with a pretty slow plane and weak weapons, so dodging around and destroying enemies is a bit of a chore. Your top priority is to upgrade that initial jalopy into the F-20 to at least make the game more fun to play. And upgrading your plane doesn't just mean completing stages, it also means completing the same boring bombing run over and over and over again, collecting money. I get the cool idea, but it ruins the pacing of the game for me. This is a shooter after all, not an RPG or a platformer. Had there been some more variety in the bombing runs, for points, it may have helped this aspect quite a bit. But not to get too down on the game, when you do finally upgrade your plane and start playing through the later stages, the game is also extremely cool. The game has that old school sensibility. The bosses are another highlight of the game and probably the most difficult part, often taking up many screen lengths and requiring multiple passes back and forth to take out. At the same time, the gameplay goes against my sensibilities. Shooters have always been about not getting hit and getting your dodge on. In this game, you get a life bar, and it's there for a reason, as part of the strategy is often taking hits on these large bosses to get in some powerful weapon unloads of your own. You almost feel like a bomber, taking a beating in a battle of attrition, and taking the boss out before they do you. But these minor personal gripes aside, the game is legitimately hard. There are many scenarios where the right strategy, not adept dodging, is what you'll need to persevere. And persevere is the right word. Having to collect money through multiple bombing runs after each stage starts to feel like a slog, and makes the game drag more than it should. And these bombing runs aren't very optional either, as once you reach the final enemy base, you'll need the weapon loadouts of some of the best planes to be able to damage the boss at all. So the first time you get here, as I did, you can see I have literally no weapon types to reach the weak point on this bastard. No, my only option was to die and go back and collect. Bombing run after bombing run, 25,000 points at a time, until I finally had enough for the elite F200. Could I have settled for one of the others to kill the boss? Maybe. But come on, who are we kidding? We gotta have the baddest plane at the end, right? So after, I kid you not, a good dozen or so, maybe 2 of these runs, I finally collected enough to buy it. And then some more bombing runs to save up money to buy a good weapon loadout for it. And finally, I can now tackle this level again, and the boss. Really does sound a bit like an RPG, doesn't it? The boss itself is not super tough if you remain patient and follow the strategy. At the start of the fight, grab this hidden shield so you can take some hits. Then drop a mega bomb to clear out the fodder below, if you like. Then slowly start working away with your gun, pausing to keep the bottom area clear of enemies. If you get greedy, you'll take a hit as the enemies get overwhelming, but if you remain patient, victory will be yours. Once you've got the F200, it's pretty much smooth sailing. It's got a killer weapon loadout that makes the game the most fun to play, and you get it just in time to enjoy for just the final 2 stages. At least here you get to put your various weapons to good use. But again, the game almost feels easier toward the end, at least for me. It's the slower and weaker planes, and all that grinding early on, that makes it feel tougher. This mini-boss isn't tough at all. Just keep plugging away and dropping a falcon bomb to keep the ground clear at regular intervals, and really, no need to use much anything else. The final boss is really cool and a perfect opportunity to unload your entire arsenal. It's quite dangerous if you leave the turrets around long, so take out as many as possible with your super shell at the beginning, and then start dropping bombs. The same cannon is useful once you fly underneath, followed by my remaining stingers on the pass back over. Once you've exposed the inside, you can unleash with your cluster bombs, electric field, you name it. Just take it down. I like to save my mega bombs for the end, and the second one is usually enough to take it down for good. Looking back, it's hard to pick the game apart. It does so many things so well, and it even gives you an awesome intro and ending to enjoy. It's really a complete experience. Just be prepared for a long, drawn-out battle, and not just a quick blast. It's more akin to going to war, and on that front, it succeeds with a brutal difficulty to match.
My last pick was a really tough one because there's so many great games on the system that I'd love to highlight. Classics like Axelay, for example, that many have heard about from Konami, but also more rare games like Space Megaforce that many haven't, or something like Macross Scrambled Valkyrie that's one of the best on the system that very few have actually played. And while not easy games by any stretch, they're also not difficult enough to make a top 5 list. Then you have truly difficult games, but they're absolutely terrible, like D-Force. Nobody wants to see me play that crap. Then I came across a rare one indeed, rare enough to where I hadn't played it yet, and after doing some research was actually ranked as one of the hardest on the system. So of course I had to try it. And it was definitely cool and unique enough and hard enough to nail that final spot. And that game is Acrobat Mission.
So what makes Acrobat Mission so unique? Well, for starters, I think it's the only shooter I ever played where you bounce off the enemies, and only their bullets can actually kill you. You heard that right. No kamikaze ships here. The enemies here will bounce you around like a pinball. Now you'd think that would make the game easier, and you may be right on the surface, but in fact, it's how the later stages are designed to kick your ass. But more on that later. The other cool mechanic here are your bombs. Yes, they can work like normal bombs, but you'll be scarcely using them here. You can have 2 bombs that stay attached to the sides of your ship, and when hit from either side, instead of dying, the bomb is released, almost like a shield, so you can take a hit and still get to drop a bomb and do some damage. In fact, you have multiple ways to do damage, and that's part of the game's fun. Aside from your shot and bombs, you also release a jet as you move around the screen. That jet can also do damage to enemies, and if that weren't enough, when you die, you get a timer as your ship spins out of control into circles, and if you can maneuver onto enemies as the timer expires, you'll explode into bits for some nice kamikaze damage of your own. Pretty cool, right? And yes, that means in this game, you respawn where you die. No checkpoints, only continues. The music is also pretty cool and fits the game well, with fun tunes throughout. The sound effects are another story. They're extremely wonky, can even be a bit annoying, but I actually found them charming, and they gave the game a bit of an old school flair, which it already kinda has. The charge beam when you hold the weapon down makes me think of Space Invaders. Only luckily, that's not what I'm playing, as I suck at those games. So what makes this game so tough, often ranked as one of the hardest? Well, on the first couple stages, not that much. The enemies do take a good bit of damage to kill, and your ship isn't all that fast, with no speed-ups, but between your charge beam and powered-up weapon, you have enough firepower to manage. The real trick to this game is staying alive once the enemy patterns start to fill the screen and bouncing you around. You'll often find yourself in an undodgeable situation, as you get stuck on enemies and can't move freely, so you get nailed while being forced around by them. This game is the very definition of enemies hurting you where they want you to go, and in many cases, you can't just force yourself around them. They almost seem to have a way of sticking to you and taking you for a ride. It'll also confine your ship to small spaces like this stage, and then add large ships into those spaces, giving you very little room to maneuver. But overall, I didn't find it as hard as some claims that I read online. It's up there with the toughest on the SNES, but it didn't frustrate me at any point, like some others. In fact, the game has an easy pick-up-and-play feel to it. Some sections like this one on 4 have a cool effect and are fun to play through. It's also not a very long game at all, with really just 4 stages, followed by a very long boss and another for the final level. In fact, most of the bosses in the game are a big part of the challenge, having 3 to 4 different phases and turning into a battle of attrition to see how long you can last. The final boss is honestly a pain. Waiting for it to open for a few hits, then dodging some more fireballs over and over. Once it gets to 5 fireballs, watch out, as they're quite tough to dodge. It's almost made to take out any remaining lives that you may have. I almost had him here, and Bastard got me as he died, but at least I got to dive bomb him in the end. And for your efforts, you get a short escape sequence and a bunch of mangled English text. Finally, you did a great job. We're really amazed by your tremendous management for your Acrobat Mission. See you next! All in all, I'd call this one average, and I'd throw it on again one day as a guilty pleasure, as its minimal time investment and that old school feel is kind of up my alley. It's not in the league of the other games I played this week, except maybe in difficulty, but it's quite a bit harder than it looks, and definitely belongs in the discussion for one of the harder games on the Super Nintendo.
So what did you think of my picks? Let me know in the comments. Surely, I could have gone with something like Super RType as one of the 5, but to be honest, I didn't want to do 2 R-types in one video. Plus, the slowdown in this one just drives me batshit insane. So I wanted to pick one. This one, part 3, is harder for me and by far the better game. So that's the one that got the nod. One day, I'd enjoy doing a video on my favorite shooters on the SNES. Not necessarily the most brutal, as it's got some excellent hidden gems that more people should check out. If that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, definitely let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to subscribe, as I've got a whole bunch of more really cool videos in the works. And if you liked this video and haven't checked out some of my other top 5 most brutal series, I think you'd really enjoy them. I've done the Mega Drive, the Neo Geo, the Saturn, the PC Engine, and you can check them all out right here or in the playlists. So until next time, keep hitting that shooter crack pipe. And a tissue handy in case of spontaneous shmupgasm. And smoke them if you got them.